If you've worked in JavaScript before, or if looking for code examples online, you may notice that semicolons are sometimes used and sometimes not. JavaScript programs are made up of multiple statements, which are read from the top to the bottom of the file. A statement is basically an instruction, such as creating a variable declaration or the code to run inside of an if statement. Although semicolons in JavaScript programs are required, if we choose not to manually write them, the JavaScript parser will add them in for us automatically where they are required. These semicolons are added at the end of each statement, and the process is called automatic semicolon insertion. This doesn't mean we can simply forget about using them altogether. There are cases when we still need to add them in manually. For example, let's add some variables and check out the results. You'll notice that I'm in video number 80, which is comments, semicolons, and ASI, and also have this open inside the browser. Go down to the script section, and what we're going to do is create two constants, and the contents doesn't really matter at the moment. I'm just going to add a name, and then a second constant, which can be learning JavaScript. And this is a Boolean value of true. And then inside of a console log, we've outputted single variables in the past, but we can also add a comma and output the value of both of these variables. Save the file and head over to the console. Refresh and we see our two variable values. So nothing unexpected here. We get probably what we expected, which is our two variables, and we'll log them to the console. But what about if we added these variables onto the same line? Let's try this. Place this on the same line and make sure any semicolons are removed from the end of each statement. First of all, we can see that the text editor has highlighted an issue here as soon as we do this. And if we were to save this and refresh the browser, we'll see a syntax error inside the console. We have an unexpected token of const because the JavaScript parser doesn't expect to get to this stage here and then see a new const declaration. If we have multiple statements on the same line like this, we need to declare that these are two separate statements by separating these with a semicolon. So place the semicolon in between, and now the text editor is not highlighting any issues. We can test this out. Save and refresh, and this is now all working fine. And you can also see that my text editor has automatically placed these on separate lines, since these are two separate statements. Along with this semicolon, some other gotchas are when we begin a new line with brackets, or often referred to as parentheses. Let's take a look at an example just after these two constants. Create a new variable with let called score. Give us a random number such as 97.34. A constant of damage, and again a random number 10.42. Just as a side note, I've created this as a let, since a score can generally be updated. We can output the result of the score with the damage taken off. Now if we save this and refresh, this is the correct value inside the console. So we know we can perform a calculation inside of these brackets, as we just seen inside the console log. But what about if we took this console log away and did something else with this calculation? For example, instead of result in 86.92, what if instead we wanted to round this to say 86 or 87? Well, to do this, JavaScript has a inbuilt method which we can use called toPrecision. We can chain this on the end with the dot, lowercase 2, and this is camel case, so precision starts with a capital P. To use this, we're then passing the length value of 2 to make it 2 digits long. Now let's see the effect of what would happen if we were to forget to put in any semicolons. Now Visual Studio Code will automatically insert these in for us when needed, but if we were to leave these out just like this and hit save, we would instantly see what would happen when the JavaScript engine reads through this code. We can see that this line has been inserted directly after this statement just here, because we don't have any semicolons to separate. So let's save this and refresh, and we see an error. We cannot access damage before initialization. And this is because this line just here begins with these brackets. Now this may not mean much if you were completely new to JavaScript, But if you've done a little bit of JavaScript in the past, this is actually how we declare a certain type of function. So rather than interpreting this section of code and this section of code as 2 lines, it's actually reading from left to right and continuing this through as one full line of code. So to fix this, as you may expect, we need to separate these with a semicolon. And then if we refresh, this will then now get rid of the error and everything is clear in the console. We can also directly see the result of this calculation by cutting out this line of code, creating a console log and pasting this back inside. Save this and refresh the browser, and our value has now been rounded to 2 decimal places. There is also other math functions which we'll look at later which can round these values up and also round them down too. So just to recap, using semicolons in JavaScript is optional. It's completely down to you if you want to use them or rely on them to be inserted automatically. But do be aware there are some cases when we start a new line of code with the brackets where we need to make sure we insert these manually so it doesn't cause any errors. To round off this video, we're going to take a quick look at using comments. Comments are simply a way for us to make notes inside of our code, which won't be read as any JavaScript code. We can also use it to comment out our code too, and this means that particular line of code is still there in our program, but it's not read when the script is executed. So to insert a comment or a note, we begin in JavaScript with the 2 forward slashes. And then we can type a note such as must have semicolon in above statement. And if we save this and refresh the browser, we don't see any reference to the comment inside of here. But what if we had a longer comment which spread onto multiple lines? So for example, if we had a comma just here and then said control the length of number using to precision. Well, like most of the time, the text editor will give us a clue to whether we are doing something right or wrong. Immediately, this changes color and we have this red underline below. So we can see that this is not the way it's expected to be wrote. For this, we can either begin each new line of code with the double forward slashes, or instead, we could convert this to be a multi-line comment, which is a forward slash and then a star. We can then remove the second line comment and then go to the end of our comment just here. And we can end this with the opposite, which is a star and a forward slash. As mentioned before, we can also comment out lines of code too. If we want to leave a certain code in place for reference, or if we want to reinstate it later on, all we need to do is exactly the same. So for example, if we wanted to remove this constant of Chris, we'll just add the 2 forward slashes in front. This line of code will then turn grey and is no longer available to access inside of our program.